No, wait, I'm telling you, man. Let's give it a try. Card games could be really, really cool. Dude, shut up. Do I look like I play fucking Hearthstone? Bro, we just bought the game. Let's try it before refunding it at least. Steam has like a 2 hour maximum refund time, so if we don't like it, we can just refund it in like 20 minutes. I just really want to try it out, come on. Fine, let's try this card game, it's gonna be fun. What? What the fuck is this, dude? I don't know. It's really weird. You know what? Let's just get it over with. It can't be that hard. It's a card game. Come on. My older brother was on a long road trip with a couple of friends up the mountain trails in the far north of our home country. It's a deserted, vast, empty place, and the everlasting darkness from the late autumn weather made the road unclear at times. A direct quote from my brother goes, "The roads featured a surprising amount of tarmac, that being any at all," painting the picture of how desolate their environments could be. When they eventually arrived at their destination, they met a longtime friend that they had not seen in years, and spent the night at his place. The very same day, their friend had just gotten himself a copy of a brand new game. A card game, to be exact. This game was Inscryption. Greetings. I will inform you that this is the point of no return. After this, you will encounter a lot of spoilers. Do you wish to proceed? If you pressed yes, I have to ask you again for safety measures. Do you wish to proceed? Do you wish to proceed? Inscryption is a deck building game released on October 19th this year, developed by the indie game developer Daniel Mullins and published by Devolver Digital. As my brother finally returned home from this journey, he had lots of great stories to tell, but one thing really stood out. There was one thing he really wanted to tell me, something he was really exaggerated about, and that was play Inscryption. So, as the money-wasting idiot I am, I instantly bought the game after playing the demo, wasting 15 fucking bucks on a card game. How stupid of me. How stupid of me to not understand what a great choice this was. The game is set in an abandoned wooden cabin in the middle of an unknown forest. In front of you is a wooden table, lit up by a couple of dim candles. At the end of the wooden table, a couple of tangerine-colored eyes appear. They stare directly at you, not at your character, but you, the player. The shadowy figure explains the game to you, switching roles between being your guide and your opponent throughout the game. The only information you get is that you have a chance of escaping from this cabin, but to do so, you must beat him. The card game may sound quite complicated at first, but after a couple of rounds you quickly get the gist of it. Each card has a name, a portrait, an attack power, a health index, and possible sigils or markings. They are based on either real animals or mythological creatures, anything from a stoat card to an Ouroboros card, and almost every card you encounter in the game can be acquired and added to your collection. However, to be able to use a card, sacrifices need to be made, and that's where the squirrel card comes in. It works as a free card, having no purpose other than dying. This card is perfect for sacrificing so that you can play stronger cards against your opponent. And for that reason, the squirrel cards have their very own card deck next to your battle card deck. You have the choice to place your cards anywhere you like at the front row, and your goal is to make sure that your opponent's cards is beaten before yours. If he happens to kill your cards protecting your row, his cards will attack you directly instead, which rewards him with points. However, if you beat his cards before he's able to take your deck down, you will be rewarded. Let's say if your stout card managed to hit a space that's unprotected by your opponent, you will be rewarded with 1 point since the stout's attack power equals 1. You got it? Me neither. Let's continue. The points comes in the form of teeth, and they are placed on a scale to your left. If your opponent hits you directly enough times, he will gain so many teeth that the scale tips in your direction. When it's heavy enough and hits the table, you have lost. If you manage to tip the scale to his side of the table, you have won, and you're granted access to progress the map. I know this is a lot to process, but you'll get used to it. It's not as complicated as it may sound. Or maybe I'm just shit at writing. Who knows? Anyway, even though the card games are the only way to progress the game, it does not mean that you're stuck to the table at all times. You can get up and walk away from it anytime. You can also search the cabin for any clues or advantages. There are lots and lots of mysteries to be uncovered inside the cabin. Some require a bit of thinking, while others are things you actually have to do to make the game progress. After winning against the shadowy creature again and again, you're introduced to the different routes you can choose to take while progressing the game. You will encounter lots of possible ways to upgrade your cards by doing certain rituals. There are catches to these rituals, however, emphasizing that you're never really safe in here. It's up to you what risks you're willing to take. I won't go through all the mechanics of the game, so that there are plenty of content yet to be explained, for you to enjoy. So don't you worry, I won't ruin all the cool experiences in this game. Just some of them. There is one thing this game excels at, and that is how it plays with its surroundings in a fabulous way. And the best examples to prove this is to explain the encounters of the boss fights. The first out of the game's 3 bosses is the Prospector. To make the battle as immersive as possible, the shadowy figure pulls out a mask, a pickaxe, and the trees from outside the cabin is being pulled close to the table. In other words, by entering the fight, the whole room as well as the figure transforms into something horrifying and out of this world. But somehow, all of this is just an illusion, as you are, in reality, still fighting the same opponent on the same wooden table as always. And this is something I feel is being overlooked in most games nowadays. How this sudden change in environment and art direction creates an atmosphere that without a doubt make you feel terrified as well as very alone. I love this. If I would describe it in one sentence, I would say that it's like you are watching a low-budget stage play performed by a solo actor while on drugs. I've never been on drugs, and I never will, but playing Inscryption sure is the closest I've been to an acid trip. After beating the Prospector, you are presented with a new map. This time, you're aiming to destroy a sunken fisherman called the Angler. You follow the same procedure as before, battling your way through multiple matches, and as you progress, you also obtain better cards and sigils. These enhances the dynamic gameplay and gives you new card deck combinations for you to experiment with. When you finally meet the Angler, a new transition in the environments occur, as the creature puts on a rough humanoid mask and pulls up a hook, which he can use to steal your cards with during the match. Again, a change of surroundings done amazingly. The stage play of drugs delivers once again. In the last chapter of the game, you find yourself in a snowy mountain-like map, where you follow the same procedure as always and eventually are met by the last boss in the game, the Trapper. You can fight him by using different materials you have gathered along the way, like animal skins, which this guy seemed to be very fond of. You're now ready to go all out on this guy and get the hell out of this place. At this point, your card deck is so over upgraded that your build is nearly unbeatable at times. You show him the door and kick his ass while he takes off his mask and show you the door, so that you can get out. Fuck, should have written that better. Anyway, you're finally ready to leave this place and you enter the last part of the map. This part seemed to be the cabin which you're currently sitting in. So you do what a guy with big balls would do. You enter the cabin. While entering, you get this extremely bizarre transition where you wake up in the middle of the forest and look at the entrance of the cabin from outside, as if you yourself were the little woodcarved figure moving around on the map. As you make your way to the door, you are given multiple advantages and preparation tools, really emphasizing that, yeah, this is where the shit gets super real. And this, ladies and gentlemen, are where you will fight the real final boss of the game, the creature himself. He reveals his face to you, and then the lights go out. The whole room turns purple, and the masks used in the previous boss fights shows up from time to time. You are really confronted by everything you have accomplished, but now the mastermind himself is behind it all. After a rough battle against him and all his cards, you are up against his last test. You have to beat the greatest card that you could ever possibly imagine. You have to beat the moon itself. Now, if you have an overpowered godlike card deck at this point, which I'm certain that you have, you beat the shit out of the moon and send it sky high. No pun intended. And that's it. No more card games from here on out. He eventually admits your victory and gives you a prize like none other, a fucking disgusting ass cake. As you stare at the monstrosity of a cake in front of you, the screen goes black, before booting up a collection of old, unedited video footage by a man named Luke Carter. This quirky guy tells you about his interest in opening vintage card packs, one of these being the card game Inscryption. One of these cards contain a set of coordinates, and Luke goes to investigate them. These coordinates lead him to the middle of nowhere and he starts digging the ground in hopes of finding something interesting. To his surprise, he finds an old copy of a video game called, you guessed it, Inscryption. He brings it back home and boots up the game, and to our surprise, it takes us to the main menu of the game we are playing right now. It's a cool little detail that enhances the bizarre experience Inscryption has to offer, and in some way, this sequence of videos explaining how Luke found this game is a very good way of describing the game itself. It's like finding a piece of lost media and you are the one to uncover it. After this, we are taken back into the cabin, still staring at the cake. There is one detail I haven't mentioned yet, and I feel this could be a nice place to explain it. The creature, now known as Leshy, used a camera to turn certain creatures into playing cards and trap them inside of it. But we'll come back to this. If you fail to reach this point of the game, you lose your current card deck and will have to start from scratch and work your way up again. Before you're allowed to try again, Leshy will let you create a dream card. A dream card lets you design your very own card with unique power combinations and abilities. Now that it's created, you can now come across it and obtain it on your next try. Just before Leshy lets you continue, he always makes sure to grab a picture of you to use as the portrait on the dream card itself. If you die again, you must create a new dream card and so on. However, 3 of the cards within your deck will always stay with you whether you fail or not. They can also talk to you, give you hints and clues, and help you throughout your playthroughs. These 3 little fellas are all victims to Lesh's camera ability, and are now trapped within these cards. The reason I'm telling you this is very important to be able to understand the ending. And here it comes. After staring at the cake for a while, you are back at the room you wake up in every time you fail. But this time, you manage to grab Lesh's camera and take a photo of him. And you guessed it, he turns into a card. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is Inscryption. This game was such a wonderful journey to experience. I feel that the uniqueness and the innovative design really shows us, the players, what a game can be. I'd easily give it a 9 out of 10. And without any further ado, guys, thank you so much for Holy shit, dude, this was not what I expected from a card game at all. That's what I told you, man. The game was freaking terrifying. A bizarre ending though. We had to actually exit to the main menu to be able to complete the game. Yeah, well, should we tell Josh about it? He would love this. Wait, what's that? That option weren't there before. New game? We had to press continue to start the game, so I guess this is new? I don't know. I guess it just restarted. Look. Wait, what the fuck? Inscryption is a video game developed by Daniel Mullins and published by... I'm joking. I know how confused you got there. The look on your face right now, I had it too. So let's explain what's going on here, as I'm sure you have no fucking clue of what just happened. This right here, this is also Inscryption. Act 2. After taking a picture of Leshy and turning him into a card, you have the option of starting a new game at the main menu, and by doing so, you're taken into a completely different world, with different cards, mechanics, enemies, in short, a different game. Your first task in this new game is to pick one of the following runestones to determine your playstyle. These are supposed to represent the 4 scribes: Magnificus, Grimora, PO3 and our old pal, the creature himself, Leshy. The main goal of the game is to replace the scribe that you picked, and for that reason, your starting deck will be similar to the scribe you chose. So let's say you want to replace PO3, then your starting deck will be based off of PO3's playing cards. I'm sorry if this was poorly explained, but the game gets very confusing from here on out, so this was my best attempt to prepare you for what's to come. Now you are ready to go on a brand new adventure in this entirely new world. In order to replace the scribe that you chose, you need to defeat all 4 of them. So let's grab our cards and head out. After moving on, you quickly realize that Act 2 is designed and structured extremely different from the first act. Instead of being trapped inside a cabin in the woods, this game gives you the option of exploring the entire world at your own pace. The game is also designed in an 8-bit 1980s style with fun and creative character designs. It's almost like we are looking into Daniel Mullins' childhood in some way, and it's a nice change of pace after going through the terrifying first act of the game. So you continue on your merry way and choose which area you want to complete first. If you felt like this area was too big of a challenge at this point, you can just go to another area and try the enemies over there. I don't want to explain all the fights in the second act because I'd like you to check it out for yourself. And because there is a shit ton of fights in Act 2. However, there are 2 things about this act that I want to talk to you about. One positive aspect of the game and one negative. Let's start with the positive one first. The one thing that really separates this act from the previous one is the NPCs. There are plenty of NPCs to encounter in Act 2, and almost all of them challenges you to a duel which you need to win in order to proceed. By adding NPCs, Daniel Mullins also chose to add personality to them, and this is something I really like. Let's take Magnificus Wizard Tower as an example. In this area, you meet a lot of Magnificus students who clearly suffers from either physical or mental conditions, making you feel some kind of sympathy for them when you kick their ass with your overpowered card deck. In the first act, Leshy played all the bosses in what I described as a solo actor stage play, but now we get to see a lot of individual characters with their very own personality and motivation. Even though I loved Act 1's way of introducing quote-unquote new characters, I still really appreciate the work they put into these NPCs. And now, over to the negative aspect of Act 2, the gameplay. Don't get me wrong, the gameplay is really similar to that of Act 1. You still have to sacrifice squirrels, use strong cards, and the regular deck building tactics. The negative side to Act 2 is that the cards are randomized, which means that getting a squirrel is never guaranteed. This makes sacrificing and getting any advantage in the battle twice as hard as it should be. Sometimes I had to just enter a battle only to see if I got a squirrel, die, and repeat this over and over until I finally started the battle with a squirrel card in my hands. And waiting for these squirrels without any chance to choose for yourself was pretty boring, but it gets even worse. As you progress through the different levels, you acquire new cards with abilities that you never knew existed, such as the battery-powered robot cards and the fucking gem cards. The robot cards are not too complicated, but it requires battery to use. You get one battery every round, so robot cards is rather useless unless you have saved up enough batteries throughout the match. Kinda boring, but nothing game-changing. The gem cards, however, are insanely overcomplicated. They are split into 3 categories, and to use them you need to first draw a card which allows you to use one of the 3 categories. If you have that kind of card, you can use it. This will give you the ability to place all kinds of cards in that gem category, and that will result in all of them getting 1 additional attack power, and with that you can— oh fuck me man. Fuck gem cards. I'm not explaining that shit, sorry. I think I gave you somewhat of a picture of what Act 2 is like at this point. You gather cards with new abilities, learn them, and meet NPCs that you have to duel in order to meet the 4 scribes. After beating all of them, you are finally finished. That was Inscryption, ladies and gentlemen. I'd say I'm a big fan of the second act itself. I love that this is another part of the same game, but designed to be almost unrecognizable. It creates a diverse gameplay that sometimes can be very frustrating or very fun. So with all the criticism aside, even though the first act was almost flawless, the second act of the game is also really worth a try. The different gameplay mechanics may not be as perfected as those from the first act, but they at least try to take the gameplay to a whole nother level. And I appreciate that, I really do. After beating all 4 scribes, you return to the 4 runestones that you encountered at the beginning. Now that all 4 of them are activated, you can choose which scribe you'd like to replace and the final battle is set in motion. However, before you get to beat the final boss, the game suddenly. Wait, what the fuck? We were just gonna finish him off. There is something seriously wrong with this game. Like, what's going on? Okay, but let's collect ourselves and push on. At this point, I have no idea what's gonna happen. This right here is not a glitch, a bug, or someone hacking your computer. This is simply the introduction for the third act of Inscryption. Yeah, you're in for a wild ride. Now, up to this point I was already pretty amazed over the work and dedication put into this game. But it's from here on out the game gets completely insane. Like, uncomfortably insane. The fact that Inscryption still was relatively under the radar at this point was also very terrifying, because I never knew what lied ahead. I had no guidance, no tips, I was all alone in this clusterfuck of a game, and I enjoyed every confusing second of it. So in the third act you are back in first person perspective, a lot similar to that of Act 1. But this time you find yourself inside some kind of technologically advanced facility. This facility, factory, whatever you like to call it, belongs to none other than the scribe I mentioned earlier, PO3. Throughout the game you learn that the 3 talking cards that kept helping you out in Act 1 were in fact PO3, Grimora and Magnificus. They were all trapped inside the cards by Leshy and his magical camera, but they are now set free and PO3 took the opportunity to capture you himself. Now you have to battle your way through hordes of enemies once again, but this time you do it the PO3 way. The gameplay is very similar to that of Act 1, but this time squirrels do not exist. Instead you use the battery mechanic from Act 2 throughout your fights. As I previously explained, the batteries are the cost you need to pay to place a card. The weakest ones require 1 battery, and the strongest ones require up to 5 or 6 batteries to be played. In Act 2 the battery system were useless and at times even annoying, but in Act 3 it works really well with the gameplay loop in my opinion. The problem with Act 2's battery mechanic was that it was very unnecessary, but in Act 3 battery powered cards is all you got. So switching it out with the old sacrifice a squirrel mechanic is actually a nice change. Another thing that's worth mentioning is that Act 3 is designed in a really unique way. When the cards hit each other, they pull up machine guns and fire bullets across the table. The world map you use to progress is all holographic, and the scale uses bolts to measure points instead of teeth. It's small details, yes, but I still find them very appealing. It makes you feel like this place is beyond humanity in some way, like a lost, hopeless alternative future. You're not in a cabin or a fantasy world anymore, but a facility where everything around you is bigger, better, smarter and stronger than you. It's very different from Act 1 and 2, but I could really get used to this atmosphere. Let's move on. Moving on in this surreal world, you finally encounter the 4 bosses that you need to defeat in order to progress. I know I have talked about the bosses of this game a lot at this point, but hear me out. This is where the shit gets real. Too real. Okay, so the first boss I want to talk about is the Archivist. This boss uses cards with a very unique ability which is called the Deadbite Sigil. If you attack this card, the Archivist will tell you that he has accessed your computer files and you have to pick a big enough file in order to beat him. When I saw this, I kinda laughed. And then I got dead ass serious as my PC files were opened up in front of me. This dude were not joking. He accessed all of it. And I had to humiliatingly search for a big file in front of his stupid face. This was insane. I have played a lot of cool boss fights throughout my 20-year-old life, but this was another level of cool. This was immersive. So I did what he told me to, and gave him the biggest file of video games that I had on my PC. After doing this for a couple of rounds, I'm starting to really beat the shit out of him. But then it gets worse. He asks me to choose a file that's really old and mean a lot to me. So I picked a One Piece Burning Blood file on my PC because One Piece was something I grew up with, and it had been in my files since 2017. It meant a lot to me and was fairly old, so I guessed that this was the best choice. This guy then turns the file into a playing card and informs me that if this card dies throughout the fight, it will be permanently deleted from my fucking hard drive. Like, dude, how big is this guy's balls? Fortunately, I managed to keep the card alive and beat the Archivist fair and square, but the fact that he opened up my hard drive and made me mess around with my personal stuff was intriguing and terrifying. I loved it. This is just one out of the 4 bosses of Act 3, which describes just how insanely much work is put into this act of the game. The other bosses are the photographer, the painter, and Golly. The photographer is a relatively straightforward fight. The fight is pretty similar to the usual card games, and it's not too challenging either. But there is one gimmick to this battle that's rather unsettling. Before every turn, he asks if he can take a photo of your card deck, and you can either say yes or no, and he will respect your answer. And that's it. It's really bizarre, and the fact that you never know when this will be used against you or not is what makes this fight a bit unsettling. But there is not much more to it, so you beat his ass and move on. Next up, the Painter. The Painter is a very interesting fight, which separates itself greatly from the other bosses in the game. The gimmick to this fight is that you, yourself, will decide the gimmick of the fight. Okay, that made no sense, but hear me out. First, you're asked to give the boss a design. He presents a lot of different options you can choose from and wants you to pick them out. When this is done, he will use this face throughout the match. Next, he will ask you to do the exact same thing, but this time you will have to choose the rules of the battle. An example of this could be every time you play a card, a random card takes 5 damage, and so on. This is a very creative mechanic. It lets you, the player, take control of the fight, but your greed and lust for victory will usually be your demise, so you have to choose wisely. After a couple of rounds, the Painter starts really enjoying this and lets you add another rule to the game. And from here on out, the card game is just a massive clusterfuck of insanity as the cards blow up everywhere and the rules just gets in the way constantly. It gets annoying, sure, but it's your fault for choosing poorly. This fight is great and I really recommend you try it out for yourself. But with that out of the way, let's move on to the last boss I want to talk about today, Golly. Golly has a very unique mechanic. Throughout the match, she starts a process she calls connecting to the web. She then tells you that someone from the web is sending you a card. This card is almost similar to the Dream card from Act 1, that someone created just for you, to use against her. Very interesting. After this, she continues to connect to the web, and surprisingly enough, she accesses your Steam profile and uses your very own Steam friends as playing cards. Now you have to fight your own friends controlled by Golly herself. It's a wild battle with all kinds of mechanics, gimmicks, and surreal abilities that just makes this simple card game become a surreal and personal experience. Before kicking her ass, you're given one final choice, the choice of making a dream card yourself. This time, you will be the one to create a card and help another player online. Or, if you are a cruel son of a bitch, you can create a shit card on purpose. Anyway, this card will be sent to a player online, and if this player uses your card to beat her, you will win the fight. It's such an innovative mechanic that actually makes the outcome of the battle depend on strangers online, which I really appreciate. But hey, with all the 4 bosses destroyed, let's confront PO3. You finally make your way to PO3 himself. He informs you that you have been pretty naive throughout your journey. He tells you about how you let him into your hard drive, designed the ending for yourself, took pictures of your deck, and connected him to the internet to upload it all of which describes the 4 bosses you just beat, and all of them together result in you messing up badly. And I feel like this is something we need to talk about. If you combine all the 4 bosses of Act 3, you get a very specific and interesting result. One photographs you at any given time. The other browses your local and personal files that you want to keep private. The third one lets your creative freedom go berserk, and the last one manipulates your online connections and turns them against you. All of these combined is the very essence of one thing: the fear of advanced technology. The fear that you are recorded, followed, observed at any time, The feeling that your private belongings are so easily accessed, that your online friends could be someone else than you think. And most importantly, what the technological science can do when it's pushed to its limit. The technological advanced era is here, yes, and it's frightening. And that's something that should always be taken into consideration. I feel like Act 3's motive is executed masterfully, by breaking the fourth wall and telling you what you actually should be cautious about. So with all the acts analyzed, I think we can safely call Act 1 an informative introduction. We can call Act 2 a blast from the past. And Act 3, I'd like to call a terrifying dystopian future. But hey, that's just my opinion. Maybe I'm looking into it too much, but I still feel like it's a valid perspective on the game's structure, so I'll keep it in mind. So now, ladies and gentlemen, over to the ending. You know what? I have no interest in talking about the ending. I want you, the player, to figure it out for yourself. What I'd like to focus on is the extreme tension and constantly fourth wall breaking that this game provides through a card game. It's innovative, meta, immersive, and at all times aware of how the game experiments with itself. I can now assure you that this was Inscryption. No more plot twists from here on out. This is a card game that gave me so much more than I expected, and I hope that you, the watcher of this video, consider playing it for yourself, as there is still much left to be told. In the 70s and 80s, the rock band Queen seemed to always break the norm and take innovative decisions that made their experimental music so extremely successful. In 1975, they made Bohemian Rhapsody, arguably one of the most innovative, beautiful, and intense songs in history. So, with every aspect of this game considered, I would like to call Inscryption the Bohemian Rhapsody of card games. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video, and a subscribe and a like would always be so much appreciated. I have been making this video for a while now, so I'm excited to finally be able to share it with all you lovely people. But seriously, consider checking out Inscryption. It was a wild ride, and I'd like you to experience it for yourself. So with that said, have a good night, and I'll see you guys next time. Yo, who the fuck is this guy? I don't fucking know. Cool game though. Yeah, sure man. You wanna go out and drink some beers like the cool kids? Oh sure, let's go.